The year was 1988, and Los Angeles was getting ready to host one of the most iconic moments in bodybuilding history. On September 10th, the Universal Amphitheater turned into the world's epicenter of the sport, bringing together athletes, fans, and the anticipation of another legendary chapter of Mr. Olympia. And right from the early hours, the crowd could feel it. This wasn't just another edition. Something big was about to happen. More than 6,000 fans packed the venue, eager to see the greatest physiques on the planet up close. The energy coming from the stands created an electric atmosphere, like everyone there knew they were witnessing something historic. And they were. This would become the highest-grossing Olympia ever at that point, a true milestone for the IFBB and for bodybuilding worldwide. It was also the only year the organization decided to officially weigh every competitor before the show. The weigh-in took place 48 hours before prejudging, during a press conference set up just for that. The whole procedure added an extra layer of seriousness to the event, revealing the exact numbers of how each athlete would be stepping on stage. And even more, it raised the suspense among fans, especially because any change in weight could mean an advantage or a disadvantage. To make things even more mysterious, every athlete walked into the weigh-in room wearing identical boxing robes. No showing off their condition, no giving away details before the right moment. The goal was total equality. No one could guess who was drier, fuller, bigger, or more conditioned. Imagine watching a line of hidden legends, all covered in the same outfit, walking in to be weighed like gladiators before a battle. That's why the 1988 Mr. Olympia started long before the stage lights came on. With the grandeur of the venue, the record-breaking crowd, the unprecedented weigh-in, and the silent rivalry in the air, everything pointed to a night that would go down in history. The Olympia that year wasn't just a sports event. It became a turning point in bodybuilding culture. On that stage, two completely different eras were colliding as they tried to coexist. On one side, the classic school, harmonious proportions, clean lines, elegant poses. On the other, a new generation was emerging, one that valued sheer size, extreme muscle density, and raw visual impact more than ever before. This clash of styles was clear with every athlete who stepped on stage. Older fans went wild seeing competitors who carried the aesthetic of the 70s, the same artistic look Frank Zane had perfected. Meanwhile, younger fans were starting to fall in love with bigger, more imposing physiques, real walking powerhouses that signaled a new physical standard. And right in the middle of that transition stood Lee Haney, the perfect blend of both worlds. His physique combined the classic elegance with the powerful mass of the 80s, forming a hybrid model still studied and admired today. He represented the ideal middle ground, the point where aesthetics and size met in balance. It was as if the sport, still unsure of its path, had found in Haney a natural direction to evolve. But that balance was about to be shattered. Looking back, the 1988 Mr. Olympia would become the last major moment before the arrival of a new type of competitor, the famous mass monsters. The 1990s would soon be defined by sizes never seen before, insane muscle density, and a more extreme approach to training and prep. Dorian Yates, who would dominate the next decade, would become the ultimate symbol of this new era. When the lights finally hit the Universal Amphitheater stage, one name felt inevitable: Lee Haney. In 1988, he earned his fifth consecutive title, solidifying a reign that seemed untouchable. Year after year, Haney didn't just stay on top. He redefined what it meant to be the best bodybuilder in the world. And that night, he left no doubt. He won with a perfect score, something incredibly rare in such a competitive sport. Weighing in at an official 243.25 pounds, about 110 kilograms, Haney stepped on stage like a living masterpiece. It was impressive how he managed to unite elements many believed couldn't coexist: the aesthetic balance of the 70s and the commanding size the 80s were beginning to demand. His presence commanded respect. His poses were firm, confident, and still elegant. He didn't need to overdo anything. His physique spoke loud enough. Judges saw a complete athlete, but the audience saw something even bigger: a champion who dominated effortlessly, as if he were always one step ahead of everyone else. That's why he was known as the untouchable king. In 1988, that name had never made more sense. Haney's victory that year is also remembered as a symbolic moment. Many sports historians describe the 1988 Mr. Olympia as the exact point where bodybuilding shifted into a new phase, and Haney stood right at the center of that transition. He was the perfect bridge between the old guard, shaped by Arnold Schwarzenegger and classic aesthetics, and the new generation that, in the 90s, would be defined by brutal size and never-before-seen muscle density. And before we talk about the overall results from that year, we need to take a moment to highlight the top 5, because it's still remembered as one of the most symbolic lineups in Olympia history. Each athlete represented a different philosophy within bodybuilding, and that made the showdown even more exciting. At the top, as everyone expected, was Lee Haney. His narrow waist, massive lats, and refined symmetry gave him an almost mythical level of dominance. His stage presence was so strong it felt like he controlled the atmosphere just by standing under the lights. Right behind him came Rich Gaspari, stepping in at an impressive 209.5 pounds, about 95 kilograms. Gaspari was the guy who introduced a new obsession into the sport: extreme definition. His conditioning was so far ahead of its time that many fans still look back at 1988 as the year the shredded look became the standard. His vascularity, razor-thin skin, and ability to show every muscle detail changed the way judges and athletes approached prejudging. It's wild to think how one man can influence an entire decade just with his physique, isn't it? Third place went to Barry Demier, weighing 227 pounds, about 103 kilograms, of pure symmetry. Demier was known as one of the most photogenic physiques of the event, the kind of athlete who looked incredible both live and in official photos. His proportions were so harmonious, he looked like a sculpture. Every pose seemed carefully crafted. Every transition flowed naturally. For many fans, Demier represented the peak of balance between power and beauty. Fourth place went to Lee Labrada, weighing just 176 pounds, around 80 kilograms, yet dominating the stage with an elegance that quickly turned him into a crowd favorite. Labrada was the living symbol of classic aesthetics: perfect lines, refined proportions, and a presentation style that felt almost artistic. He didn't just compete, he told a story with his body. Closing out the top 5 was Gary Stridham, one of the most visually imposing physiques of that generation. He brought volume, density, and an imposing frame that foreshadowed the shift that the 1990s would bring. Even without placing higher, Stridham made it clear that his powerful, balanced look was a preview of the type of athlete that would soon take over the sport. Now, looking at the full 1988 Mr. Olympia lineup, it becomes instantly clear how grand that stage really was. It wasn't just a battle between favorites. It was a historic gathering of styles, weights, and generations crossing paths in front of more than 6,000 spectators. From 6th to 10th place, several athletes who defined the decade also shined. Mike Quinn, weighing 204 pounds, about 92 kilograms, and Brian Buchanan, with 210 pounds, around 95 kilograms, presented solid, consistent physiques. Samir Banout, a former Olympia champion, came in at 205 pounds, roughly 93 kilograms, still showcasing impressive refinement. Ron Love, with 222.5 pounds, about 101 kilograms, displayed remarkable density, while Bob Paris, weighing 226 pounds, around 102 kilograms, delivered one of the most aesthetic performances of the night. This middle block showed the perfect blend of established veterans and rising talents. From 11th place onward, the show continued with names of massive importance to the sport. Mohammed Benaziza, weighing just 188 pounds, around 85 kilograms, left the crowd stunned with his insane muscle density. Phil Hill, at 222.5 pounds, about 101 kilograms, displayed a powerful physique. And Sean Ray, stepping on stage at 201.5 pounds, about 91 kilograms, showed clear signs that he would soon become one of the biggest names of the next decade. From 14th to 17th place, Mike Ashley, Albert Beckles, Ed Kowak, and Robbie Robinson. The lineup became a gallery of contrasting styles: classic physiques, dense muscular builds, aesthetic silhouettes, and historically iconic athletes. Closing out the list, 3 competitors stood out for their size and presence. Peter Hensel, at 240.5 pounds, about 109 kilograms, brought above-average volume. Luiz Freitas, representing Brazil at 219.5 pounds, around 100 kilograms, earned his spot among the giants that night. And finally, Ralph Moeller, weighing a staggering 288 pounds, about 131 kilograms, was the heaviest athlete in the entire show. A clear preview of the future bodybuilding would soon embrace, physiques growing larger, denser, and more visually overwhelming. Beyond the big names that ruled the top spots, the 1988 Mr. Olympia was also marked by performances that, even outside the top 5, left a lasting impression on the audience. One of these highlights was Shawn Ray, who, although still early in his career, showed incredible potential. His combination of symmetry, clean lines, and confident presence proved he had something you simply can't teach overnight: competitive charisma. It was obvious he was just beginning a journey that would shine even brighter throughout the 90s. Another athlete who drew a lot of attention was Bob Paris, often cited as one of the most aesthetic physiques in bodybuilding history. In 1988, Paris only reinforced that reputation with a flawless presentation that felt more like an artistic performance than a simple posing routine. Every movement he made was calculated, smooth, and perfectly harmonious. Many fans still say that if the only criterion were beauty and proportion, Paris would win on any stage. Meanwhile, Mohamed Benaziza, even at just 188 pounds, about 85 kilograms, proved that size isn't everything. He stepped on stage with incredible muscle density, deep cuts, and a level of detail that made him stand out instantly. His conditioning showed that sometimes less weight means more impact, as long as it comes with extreme definition. The contrast between his relatively low body weight and his massive presence only strengthened his reputation as one of the densest athletes of his era. And it's impossible to talk about standouts without mentioning Ralph Moeller, one of the heaviest competitors in Mr. Olympia history. At a gigantic 288 pounds, around 131 kilograms, Moeller carried a type of physique that very few athletes could reach at that time. His stage presence never went unnoticed. He simply took up more space than anyone else. When you look at the Mr. Olympia results from 1985 to 1988, it becomes clear that bodybuilding went through a fast and dramatic transformation. In just 4 years, the sport stopped focusing solely on sheer size and began to adopt new elements that would completely change how athletes trained, posed, and presented themselves. It was like watching evolution happen in real time. Every season pushed the idea of the ideal physique one step further. Back in 1985, the priority was obvious: the bigger, the better. Total body mass and overall muscular volume were the most valued criteria. Judges, fans, and the athletes themselves saw absolute size as the ultimate way to impress on stage. But even though that look was visually powerful, this standard soon started to face pressure from new trends emerging backstage, especially those centered around conditioning. Then came 1986, and with it, Rich Gaspari. That year marked the beginning of what many call the era of extreme definition. Gaspari stepped on stage with a level of dryness that seemed unreal for the time. Veins everywhere, deep striations, and skin so thin it looked glued to the muscle. That shift redefined how athletes prepared. It was no longer enough to be big. You had to be drier than ever before. It's no surprise people still consider Gaspari one of the most influential athletes of the entire decade. In 1987, the sport began searching for balance. Fans and judges started valuing competitors who could bring the best of both worlds: solid size and clean, aesthetic lines. It was the moment athletes realized that the best physique wasn't simply the biggest or the most shredded. It was the one that blended everything together smoothly. Presentations became more strategic, and pose refinement became a major part of competition prep. And finally, we arrive at 1988, the year everything collided on the same stage. The aesthetic explosion brought by athletes like Lee Labrada and Shawn Ray proved that beauty, symmetry, and flow were far from dead. In fact, they were becoming more important than ever. While the spotlight shined on the giants of Mr. Olympia, the women's stage was experiencing its own historic moment. The 1988 Ms. Olympia was defined by performances that were as powerful as they were elegant, showing the world that women's bodybuilding had already earned a solid and well-deserved place in the sport. The battle for the title brought together contrasting styles, distinct training philosophies, and a rivalry that made the event even more impactful. It was a complete show, one that won the crowd through strength, presence, and artistry. At the top, as expected, was Corey Everson, securing her 5th consecutive win. Her reign was absolute, and 1988 only reinforced it. Corey managed to combine definition, femininity, charisma, and muscle in a way that very few athletes, men or women, have ever been able to do. Her stage presence was magnetic, and every pose radiated confidence and complete control. The audience knew they were watching an athlete who didn't just compete. She set the standard. Runner-up Bev Francis brought a striking contrast. Considered more muscular and more extreme for the standards of that era, she challenged the traditional idea of what a female physique should look like. Her muscle density and powerful frame signaled a new direction trying to emerge in women's bodybuilding. Many fans saw her as the future of the division, while others felt her physique went beyond what the judges were ready to crown. In 3rd place was Carla Dunlap, an athlete respected for balancing aesthetics and muscle mass beautifully. Her physique showed it was absolutely possible to combine feminine curves, soft lines, and visible strength in one harmonious package. Dunlap represented a middle ground between Corey and Bev, proving that women's bodybuilding had room for multiple interpretations of what a champion could look like. Her routine was technical, elegant, and exceptionally well performed, earning her a memorable place among the best of the night. The top 3 of the 1988 Ms. Olympia perfectly summarized the aesthetic diversity of women's bodybuilding at the time. 3 styles, 3 distinct interpretations of strength and beauty, and 3 athletes who left their mark on history. Behind the bright lights and the intensity of the poses, the 1988 Mr. Olympia carried production secrets that helped turn that event into one of the most legendary shows ever recorded. Many fans who watched it, whether live or through the official footage, described that edition as a cinematic experience. And that's not an exaggeration. The care put into every detail made 1988 memorable not just for its athletes, but for the way the entire event was presented to the world. The video coverage from that year is still considered one of the best in Olympia history. The camera work, the lighting designed to highlight muscle separation, and the attention to each competitor's expressions created a visual record rarely seen in competitions of that era. The official event video is a perfect example. It features the full posing routines of every competitor, something that didn't always happen in previous editions. It also captures the final pose down in detail, that moment where tension reaches its peak and the athletes fight, pose after pose, for the attention of judges and fans. And to wrap everything up, the footage includes the full award ceremony, showing not only the final results, but the emotional reactions that closed the night. The production itself also deserves praise. The stage design was sophisticated, built to emphasize muscular silhouettes and deliver visual impact. The lighting created deep shadows that enhanced muscle separation, while the stage layout gave everything a grand, show-like atmosphere. When we talk about bodybuilding history, few years carry as much weight as 1988. That season's Mr. Olympia became known as the last great chapter of modern classic aesthetics, a true turning point between the sport's past and future. On the Universal Amphitheater stage, an era came to a close, one where symmetry, elegant lines, and harmonious proportions still held absolute power, right before the rise of the giants, who would dominate the 1990s. That legacy becomes even clearer when we look at the names that emerged stronger from that night. Lee Haney, with his undeniable victory, cemented himself as one of the greatest bodybuilders the world has ever seen. He wasn't just the champion. He was the perfect symbol of balance between size and beauty. For many fans, 1988 represents the peak of a bodybuilding style that managed to balance multiple criteria at once. They often call it one of the perfect Olympias, because that year delivered a rare and powerful mix: flawless aesthetics, impressive size, razor-sharp conditioning, and routines that bordered on artistic performances. And that balance is exactly why 1988 is remembered with so much nostalgia. And that brings us to the end of this journey through the unforgettable 1988 Mr. Olympia, a year that didn't just crown giants, but marked a decisive turning point in the history of bodybuilding. If you followed every detail up to this point, You probably felt the same energy that filled the Universal Amphitheater that night. Now I want to know, which moment from this Olympia stood out the most to you? And which physique, in your opinion, represents the perfect balance between size, aesthetics, and presentation? If this video helped you understand this crucial phase of the sport, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you want to support the channel even more, consider becoming a member. Now it's your turn. Drop a comment below telling me which athlete from 1988 you think was the most complete, and whether you'd like to see a deep dive episode on any of their careers. Your feedback directly shapes our next scripts, so don't miss the chance to be part of it.